Spiritual TV, and you can subscribe to it and see some of the other stuff, things that Merging Hearts offers. So that's available. Just look it up on YouTube. And then the other announcement is that there's going to be a summer break. In the month of June, I'm going to be out of state and part of the beginning of July. So what we're going to do is go pretty much to the end of May probably, and then we'll skip and then resume midway through July, which should work out perfectly because I think we can cover the rest of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, between now and then. So it'll be a nice stopping. It's like the end of season 1. So season 1 is the Torah, and then next we start out with the so-called historical books, which kind of tell the story of, well, a lot of fun stuff there too. Okay, anyway, that's just we'll make reminders of that as we get closer to it. So we're still in book 3, Leviticus, and we only did this in two weeks, right? So last time we did the first half of the book of Leviticus, which was the world of ritual and symbol. It was all about the relationship of the community to the sacred, which dwells in their midst in this tent, this tabernacle. And this second half of the book has to do with the relationship of the community to the land when they live in the land. How do you live in ordinary society? It looks outwards rather than inwards. If this is mostly about ritual, that's mostly about what we would call ethics. How do you get along with one another? Obviously, it's still kind of a special situation because you have this tent in the middle of the land, which apparently makes the land holy too. Have you ever wondered why they call it the Holy Land? I think it's because the tabernacle is in. I think that's probably the origination of that idea. I'd have to check. But anyway, we're going to look at this. So a couple of highlights. Okay, so anyway, first of all, remember that there was almost no action last week. It was all describing things. There's no action this week either. It's more describing things. But the good news is that at the end of this book, they're finished describing things. And God will say, okay, go to it now. So when we get to the next book, we're back into narrative and storytelling. But I think you'll find some of this interesting. Actually, I like to say that what are called the holiness laws or the holiness code, it is by turns inspiring and terrifying. So be prepared for both of those things tonight. Okay, so anyway, there was our tabernacle, the tent in the middle of the community with the divine presence within it kind of radiating outwards. And actually, a few more words about that. Remember that the entire system of ritual was basically how to have God as your roommate, and the fact that human beings and God are different kind of animals, and if you rub shoulders, you have to be careful because it's like a nuclear reactor, and you have to make sure you don't contaminate the reactor and degrade its casing. You got to constantly be keeping it clean. But as we saw, every kind of accident or even intentional wrong deed in this world can be easily resolved with a little decontamination, with a little blood on the altar, right? Even the most elaborate situation, the Day of Atonement, where everyone's sins are forgiven if they are repented, it's resolved fairly easily. So there's nothing that can't be forgiven or repaired in this world. When we go into the stuff for tonight, though, it has a very different understanding. Even though these are now part of the same book, they're actually 2 totally different schools of thought, and we'll see that. So they're not totally at odds with one another. They both talk about the sacred, the holy, but they think of it very differently. And we'll see some of the ways. One of the main things is that none of the bad things that you can do can be repaired in this second section. If you intentionally harm another person or the community in some way or the land, you're up the creek basically. So that's why I say it's terrifying to the extent that it presents a series of imperatives about, don't destroy the land, don't destroy the community, don't destroy yourself, because there's no way to undo the harm that you do. So if you put these 2 parts of the books together, then you have the basic question, like we were saying, it's all about questions. How do you relate these 2 perspectives? But anyway, let's take a look. Okay, so we use the term holiness. This is often referred to as the call to holiness. Holiness is the sacred, it is the divine, the realm of the source of all that exists. And remember at the beginning of this story of the people who is invited to be this treasured possession, to be to me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. That was what we saw at the mountain. And then the sign of that covenant was again the rest, the contemplation on the seventh day, to know that it is I, Yahweh, who make you holy. So here, holiness is something that is sort of bestowed upon the people. But now we come to tonight's theme, in which holiness is something that people are called to do. So this is an activist understanding of that human beings, by their own actions, can cross over into the realm of the divine, right? By their own actions, where it's you have at this crucial time, God speaks to Moses saying, speak to the whole Israelite community, every one of them, man, woman, child, and by the way, resident aliens are part of this as well. So everyone, and say, be holy, for I, Yahweh, your God, am holy. Be like me. Again, different perspective. The stuff we did last week, you can't be like God, so you have to protect yourself against that. Here it says, no, be like me. Okay, so let's see what that means. Okay, so here's an outline. We're not going to look at everything. We're going to look at these ones in green and red, because those are the most important sections of this list of ways to be like God. We're going to start off with this one, which is sort of underwhelmingly called in the modern translation, various rules of conduct, which actually is where that call to holiness is. Now, even if you know nothing about Judaism or Christianity, even if you've grown up in a culture dominated by one of those two traditions, you probably have heard something called the greatest commandment. What is the greatest commandment? Out of all the 613 notional commandments there, what's the greatest one? To love one another as you love me. That's a version of it. Yeah, it's basically love one another. Love your neighbor as yourself is the formulation, right? And guess what? That's not one of the 10 commandments. You won't find that there. That comes here. So, and that's the inspiring part. I mean, that's a nice thing, right? So if you've ever wondered what that means and what it entails, you got to read Leviticus. At least you got to read Leviticus 19, which is the list in which because it's one of 18 commandments. So at the beginning of that chapter, God says, be like me. And then he says, here's 18 ways to be like me, of which that is the central one. And it's not just like one out of 18, it's actually interwoven with all the others. So again, love, that's sort of a waffle term. I mean, you can make it mean anything you want in the culture or in your own subjective opinion. The function of these commandments is say, actually, it's not subjective. Here's what it actually looks like in practice, right? It says, here's what love looks like. So if you're interested in that, you'll be interested in this. We're also going to look at these passages on either side of it, the sandwich, as it were, the bread of the sandwich. And they are primarily negative. So this sort of is mainly positive. And then there's sort of the negative corollary. But what's weird about this is these negative examples of how not to be holy, they all have to do with sex. Now, there's a couple of commandments here that have to do with sexuality, but that's a very minor note. So my question as a reader is, okay, if this is the positive definition, why is the negative corollary all about sex? That's a big question for me. Because this is obviously very intentionally arranged this way. So that's going to be a question I want us to think about. Although when I say sex, we'll find that this understanding of sex is very different from our understanding of sex as moderns, right? Whether you're thinking in religious context or not. There's a very different understanding of sexuality here. And that actually may be of interest. Now, most of these things it says don't do, I think anyone would say, of course. But there's at least one against about male same-sex intercourse that many people would challenge today. But they probably would not challenge it for the same reasons that it's here. Even the people who are, anti-LGBT rights and so forth like that, even they would not understand the rationale for this. So I want us to treat this more as a puzzle, like why is this a negative and why is all that positive? Again, lists are paradigms that have principles underlying them, but the principles are never stated. You have to figure it out. So it's all like a big puzzle. But that's the big question. So how does love your neighbor as yourself relate to all this? Then we're going to skip ahead to chapter 25. This is more or less the conclusion. There's stuff at the end like, rewards and punishments. Okay, but that's not new content. That's just here's an incentive to love your neighbor. And then there's sort of an appendix on offerings. This is really the conclusion. This is the conclusion of God's definition of holiness, and it all has to do with economics. How you interact with one another economically in terms of the means of livelihood and stuff like that. It's what we might call it includes both environmental as well as social ethics. All this has to do with what individuals do. These are all sort of individual exhortations, but this is how people should live together in terms of an economy. And I think you'll find this very inspiring too. So that's our plan for tonight. So we're going to start off with this. Okay, so here is the summary. The so-called various rules of conduct. You have the exhortation at the beginning: be holy, for I, the Yahweh, your God, am holy. Be like me. Now here's the famous love your neighbor as yourself. There's also another one that most people don't know about it. It's at the other end. It's called love the non-neighbor as yourself. Resident aliens, right? You've heard about them before. Remember, they were non-Israelites who accompanied the Israelites out of Egypt, right? They chose to align themselves with this people, even though they're not members of the people. And we saw that some of the commandments are about how that's okay, right? It's okay to have a mixed community. But if they're part of the community, then we have to know, do you have to love them too? And the answer is yes. So think about it this way. In terms of arrangement of things, this and this come more or less at the center of the list, which is the central chapter of the book, which is the central book of the Torah. It's the third book out of 5. It's more or less the central chapter out of 27 chapters. And you have that commandment right at the center. So even the placement indicates its importance. Okay, but of course there's more to it than that. So we want to try to understand how this list works before we look at the particulars. One thing that's very peculiar about this is almost every one of these examples of holiness is followed by what I call the divine identification formula. I, Yahweh, am your God, or I am Yahweh, something like that. Well, you doesn't have to remind them about his name. I mean, they know what his name is by now, right? Like they didn't forget the last verse and he has to repeat it. What do you think it means after he says, be like me, like this, and I'm Yahweh? Why would he want to say his name again at that point, do you think? It's not just that they remember what his name sounds like, but why do you think that would be the case? So every time you say something, you say, do it because I'm Yahweh. Notice it goes back to that initial thing. Be holy like me, and this is how I am. So every one of these is, again, there's no command ethics in the Bible. No one ever says do something because I can tell you to do it. Do something because I want you to be like me. That's called virtue ethics. That's different from command ethics, where you do something just because you're told. There's a reason for it. I want you to be like me. Okay, so there's that. The other thing to note is that of all these commandments, here's the list of 18. A number of them at the beginning look a lot like the 10 commandments that we looked at. Remember, this is the Decalogue from a couple weeks ago. Not all of them, but many of them. And even the statement that began the Decalogue, the 10 commandments, occurs exactly at the end of this list. So what does that tell us about this list? The list is aware of that set of 10 statements. It incorporates some of them, but not all of them, and it incorporates them in a certain order, which is totally different from the order in which they appear here. So when we think about the arrangement of the Decalogue as a short list, a kind of a snapshot of the covenant, we see it changes from chapter to chapter. This is another transformation of that list. And it's an interpretation of it, basically. And it's also a reorientation of priorities, as we'll see. Okay, so again, it's not like we're just repeating stuff we've seen before. It's repeating it with purpose. Okay, so let's take a look at that whole thing about the Ten Commandments. So here we have the first five of the Ten Commandments from Exodus 20 in the order in which they appear in Exodus 20. Notice what we have here. They're all here, but in a different order. So we're going to look at each one of these and see how it transforms that commandment. So here is the first one. So remember at the middle of the Ten Commandments, there was the thing about honoring your parents, right? Honor your parents so you can live long in the land. Okay, so in Exodus 20, the first part of the Ten Commandments had to do with what we might call religious commandments, like how to relate to God. And right in the middle, there was this transition from the religious to the ethical, in which the parent thing was there. You're supposed to honor your parents, father, and mother. Well, look at what Leviticus 19 does. It puts parents first. It puts the ethical before the religious. And it says revere them, not just honor them. Right? Literally, it says fear, but fear in that reverential sense. Well, I'm not sure how much difference is between that in practice, but usually if you hear the word reverence, it sounds religious-y, doesn't it? Honor sounds more secular. That probably is at work there. So it's taking something which the Ten Commandments says this is the realm of how you deal with interpersonal relationships, and that's about honor. No, it says this is about reverence. It's something more powerful than that, and it puts that before any religious stuff, and puts the mother before the father. Does it mean something? I don't know, but it's obviously intentional. Right? This person's intentionally reconfiguring one of the Ten Commandments. That's our first one. Okay, next one. Duties concerning food. Well, we all need food to eat, yeah. Yeah.
Perhaps the women were viewed less than the men, and this is to say no.
We're sorry.
We're
sorry.
You're not.
In case you thought that the mother coming second meant the mother was less important, we're going to now reverse that to make sure we know that that's not the case, right? Possible. Yeah. But again, notice that the very intentionality of these changes raises questions like that, right? Forces you to think about it. Okay. So next one has to do with food. There's two about food. One has to do with something we encountered last time called communion sacrifice. Remember, there's 5 types of sacrifice. This is the fun one where you slaughter an animal so you can have a feast to celebrate your daughter's wedding, your son's graduation, fulfilling a vow, or just because you're darn happy, right? That's a communion sacrifice. So it kind of repeats that command, maybe because it's the one sacrifice of the stuff we looked at last time that involves the entire community. And to take part in this meal means to take part in something sacred. So if the whole theme of the list is be sacred like me, well, you could use this as an example. Anyway, it talks about how to have a sacred meal, you have to eat it all in one sitting. You have to completely consume all the meat. Otherwise, you're sort of not respecting the purpose of the occasion. You really have to eat, and it's like in Italy where they say mangia, mangia, mangia. You have to eat everything, right? And it's immediately followed by another commandment concerning agricultural produce. It says crops must not be completely harvested. So you have to completely eat your communion sacrifice, but you have to not completely harvest your crops. Now, in the previous week when we were looking at this, the reason why one of the things your crops are bound for is offering them as a gift to God, and you give a certain percentage of it to God, right? Thank you for giving us good crops. It's showing gratitude. But here, it's a very different sort of direction that these extra crops are going to. They're not going to be offered to God and his priests. They're going to be offered to someone else. So you have this kind of contrasting of things you do and don't do with food. Okay, so I'm going to skip over that one to this one. Here's what you do with the agricultural produce. Why don't you harvest all your food? It says, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not be so thorough that you reap the field of the very edge, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not pick your vineyard bare, nor gather all the grapes that have fallen from your vineyard. Instead, these things you shall leave for the poor and the alien. So notice you're not giving it to God on an altar, you're giving it to the people who are hungry. That's holiness. Again, most people think holy, okay, that means going to church, that means worshiping and things like that. It means giving food to people who need food. It also implies that your crops are not entirely your own, right? Not just that some the tenth belongs to God, or something, but that it belongs to people in need in the community. That's why holiness is not an individual thing. You cannot be holy in isolation. Holiness is a concept of how you get along with one another. Yeah.
Leo just put out an exhortation for Legacy K.
Mm-hmm.
I have loved you. And he speaks a lot about this. You don't give anybody anything. You share it with him.
Right. Because it's
Out of your own bounty. And,
yep.
his topic for the whole thing, overarching, is the poor.
And when we get to chapter 25, we'll see that in spades, right? That's the whole thing about it's really a vision of community, right? And notice that this community includes both people who might need it because they lack something, but also the alien, right? The non-citizen, the non-Israelite, right? So every one of these idealized laws about holiness presumes that you have Jews and non-Jews living together. Yeah.
You mentioned something about you have to be in community. Was that holiness?
Yeah, so basically holiness is something you do in the context of the community, right? It's not just I'm going to go off on a mountain and fast or something like that, right? Um, not that you can't have ritual religious dimensions of it in that sense, but again, it's an ethical dimension, right? So yeah, when I mean, Pope Leo's not making that up. It's been around for a while, right? And it's been very prominent within people teaching and things like that. But this is ultimately where it comes from. Yeah,
The thing about money
yeah.
is that there's always something you can use the money for, and you could be short. This is our shortfall.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's the other interesting thing. Very, very important point that we'll see. Um, is this a utopia that's being described? Is this a utopia in which everyone gets along and all that? No, it presumes that people don't get along, and it provides ways of getting along. Does it presume that people will never go hungry? No, it doesn't. It presumes that there will be shortfalls in crops and people will be hungry, and so how are you going to take care of them? If you're a holy community, you'll share some of your crops. And I think sharing is definitely the right word there. Okay, on to the next one. Integrity. How to live with integrity. Well, it begins by saying not to be dishonest, okay? But it's very specific. Again, it doesn't give many loopholes here. There are covert forms of dishonesty and overt forms. So obviously don't steal. You could steal without being detected, right? Don't deceive or speak falsely to one another, but you could do that without being detected. Don't swear falsely by my name. Okay, well, you could swear a false oath and not be found out immediately. But then there's also overt things. Don't exploit your neighbor. Okay, usually people who are exploited are aware that they're being exploited. Don't rob someone on the highway. Don't withhold overnight wages of your labor. That's an overt thing, right? So it includes all, what we in the Catholic tradition we call this sins of commission and sins of omission. It's not just not doing bad things, but also doing good things, not avoiding things that you should do. Okay, so honesty is an important component. Think about not exploiting the vulnerable. Don't insult the deaf. How would they know, right? Don't put a stumbling block in front of the blind. How would they know? Actually, this probably has to do with harmful speech. The use of this expression stumbling block, it's often used in the context of harmful speech. So again, don't weaponize words, right? Rather, fear your God. Well, here's one of those interesting things: is that we know that fear of God as a generic quality that Abraham and others had, it had to do with realizing that you live in a moral universe that you didn't create, and so you can't make up the rules of what is right and wrong. You have to live in harmony with the way things are, right? And it's called fear of God because it's understood that all of that wonderful world has a source, right? So to fear God means to live respectfully within the world. But notice here, if you fear God, there's a very specific thing you won't do. So it's not a generic call to obedience or something like that. It's very specific. If you fear God, you won't use harmful language, especially to people who don't know that you're harming them. Okay, then it goes into the realm of the realm of what's the word I'm looking for? The realm of legal conflict, the realm of disputation and trials and things like that. So it begins with what I call judicial speech. So this would be if you were in the context of that you were able to resolve a conflict or judge someone's dispute, don't act dishonestly, don't show partiality to either side, but judge your neighbor justly. So there's a concept of justice or fairness there. On the other hand, don't go about spreading slander. Don't stand by idly when your neighbor's life is at stake. This is not referring to a judge, but to anyone in a community. Again, don't use harmful speech to tear people down. And don't be silent if speaking up could prevent an injustice from taking place. Again, there's this concern with not omitting what you should do, right? Okay. Finally, we come to the famous command, love your neighbor as yourself. Notice that this is part of a four-part command. So if you ever wanted to know what loving your neighbor looks like, it looks like all four of these things. So let's examine this. What do we notice about? So there's two sequences of commands. Notice the first one in each verse is negative, don't do something. And the second one is positive. The first one has to do more explicitly with family, kindred, your people. The second one has to do with non-kindred, non-family members, neighbors. So here, neighbor means a member of the community who's not your family, right? Notice also the famous formulaire, as yourself. So what does that tell us about love? So it begins with self. Genuine self-love will manifest itself towards family in certain ways and will manifest itself towards non-family in certain ways. Well, I think people would agree that if you can't love yourself, you might have trouble loving other people, right? But what actually is love here? So let's take a look at each one of these and see what definition of love comes out. So first of all, the negative. Don't hate anyone in your heart. So that's not an action, is it? That's a impulse, right? Or an emotion. That's a thought, right? So it begins with what's in here. And well, that was a problem, wasn't it? It wasn't the first example of evil in the world, someone who in anger took it out on someone else, their family member, Cain, right? So the negative, don't hate anyone in your heart. Reprove your neighbor openly so that you do not incur sin because of that person. Okay, this requires a bit of parsing. Reprove is an English word, but we don't use it that often. It's kind of archaic. To reprove means to tell someone when it's in what we call an intervention, right? You know, your friend is doing something self-destructive. Eventually, you choose to intervene. Hey, if I don't say anything, I can't live with myself because I don't want to see you destroying yourself for whatever reason, right? You're doing something wrong. Reproving means speaking openly. Notice the contrast between hidden thought and open speech, right? Now, what's the motive for this? So that you don't incur sin because of that person. Okay, well, there's a couple possibilities here. It's very vague. Maybe the vagueness is intentional so that it could cover a lot of things. What if the thing you're reproving someone about is someone they're doing something that they've actually done wrong? So your coworker is embezzling funds at your office. If you don't say anything, according to this, you are guilty as well, because that makes you an accessory, right? Or complicit. You're an enabler, right? So if you love someone, you won't enable them to do bad things. Sorry, you had a thought? Oh, I have itch in my elbow too. Yeah.
Well, yeah. On this year.
Yeah. So in other words, take action. Now the other possibility is, what if you're the person who did something wrong? Or what if whatever the conflict is, if you don't speak about it openly, you might do something wrong to them, as with Cain. So could this also be, I hate this person in my heart. If I don't openly explain why, I might lose control of my emotions and do something destructive, right? So it seems to be very attentive to human psychology here, doesn't it? And also to interpersonal conflict resolution. That's what love means. Let's look at the other side. Take no revenge. Okay, revenge, last time I checked, was an action, right? So thoughts, words, actions. Cherish no grudge. Maybe that's going back to the, internal thing. Instead, love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, so this means not doing that, but doing that. So this too is an expression of love. It's unclear exactly whether it should be understood as an action. I mean, it aligns with speech. It's the opposite of taking revenge. Why do people take revenge on other people generally?
They think they've been wrong.
And usually, if you've been wronged, you want, well, what is revenge? Revenge is, it's some notion of justice. Like they have to suffer because I'm suffering. And it's actually more psychological. I want them to feel what I'm feeling. I've been wronged. My dignity has been trampled. I want them to feel what I'm feeling. Well, you can do that, but have you improved the situation by that? No, of course not, right? What did Gandhi say, right? An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. That's kind of the idea here. So notice that the whole concept of love is restorative, right? It presumes that things are going to happen that are negative. How should you respond to them, right? That's holiness. That's being like God, right? You could take revenge, but if you want to be like God, then don't. Yeah.
Something just sound about that.
Yeah.
If you don't do care, then you're continuously living in your mind and heart.
Ah,
You're not in the present.
interesting too. Yeah. So it's also about being present rather than holding on to some past injury, perhaps. But it's not just, hold on to your past injury and deal with it. No, you should confront it, right? And of course, there's a very, terrible, culture of false reconciliation today where people who are wrong should just grin and bear it. That's not what's described here, right? Now you must confront it, right? That's what love requires. Okay, so if we take this and put it, here's all the last ones we've looked. Notice it talks about your actions, right? Talks about your words, and then it talks about your thoughts as well. So it covers the whole gamut of human action and human affectivity and ends with this love your neighbor as yourself. So clearly it's kind of this isn't again isolated even here. It's looking back to all this too, right? Okay, so love is not a simple concept here. Okay, so if you want to interpret the love command, you do what we just did. We look at those two verses that it's a part of. We just looked at the group of things that it's a part of, which is all about integrity and acting with a view to the betterment of reconciliation of conflicts and things like that. Eventually, we're going to want to see how does it relate to the entire list, right? So we're almost halfway through the list already. This is good. Okay, here it gets kind of funny. This is the midpoint. You get a generic claim, keep my statutes, which means, I put things in place I want you to follow. You have these three weird prohibitions. Don't breed any of your domestic animals with others of a different species. Don't sow a field of yours with two different kinds of seed, and don't put on a garment woven with two different kinds of thread. What does that have anything to do with anything? Okay, so we're obviously moving into a different gear now with what holiness might look like. Now, when I talk to this, they say, oh, it's about not mixing things because God doesn't like mixing things. Okay, that's not a very good answer. It does have to do with not mixing things. However, there's nothing wrong with interbreeding animals that are interbreedable, right? We do that all the time, right? With donkeys and things like that. But there's something else that has to do with holiness here. Something that has to do with mixing, with hybridity. The key actually is knowing a lot of the background 2 weeks ago that we didn't talk about, which is to say, how is the tabernacle constructed? What is it made out of? Well, if you look at what it's made out of, it's made out of textiles woven from different threads. So if mixing threads is bad, then that means the tabernacle is bad, which is clearly not the case. But the tabernacle represents that sphere that is beyond the human, right? You can enter into it, but you're not supposed to be like it, right? In that sense, because that's sort of the nuclear reactor version of holiness. This belongs to the sacred. It's a kind of sacred you're not supposed to mimic, I guess. Now, of course, this is at the end of a list of ways you should be holy, right? Which is mostly ethical ways. There's another passage later on in the Torah where it says, if you sow a field with two different kinds of seed, it is forfeit. The whole thing belongs to God now, not to you. So apparently, whatever this means, this mixing of things, this hybridity, it doesn't belong to ordinary reality. It belongs to sacred reality. If you make something like it, it no longer is yours. Same thing with animals here. Well, different thing with animals. In the tabernacle, on the Ark of the Covenant, on the lid of it, there are two hybrid creatures called cherubs, which are not naked babies as they become in later medieval art. They are gigantic, fearsome sphinxes with wings. These, in the ancient Near East, a keruv is a guardian of a sacred place. They are hybrid. They are mixed. They have lion and wings. So they mix different categories. So here too, it sounds like it's saying don't try to have that kind of sacredness. That's the tabernacle. You have your own type of sacredness, right? Which is in the ethical sphere. That's one way of reading this. Okay, now we have something, and now for something completely different. All of these have so far been commands, do or don't, right? Thou shalt or thou shalt not. Suddenly, intruding in here is what we call a case law. If situation X arises, here's how to resolve it. So it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. What's the scenario? If a man has sexual relations with a female slave who's been acquired by another man but has not yet been redeemed to give her freedom, here's what you do. Before we even get into this, here's the cast of characters. So there's a woman who is unfree, right? Again, slavery is an institution in the Near East, the ancient world. It is not questioned in anywhere in the Bible. There are limits placed upon it, obviously, we saw. Only if you cannot enslave a fellow community member more than 6 years. But what happens if a woman is unfree? She is under the control of an owner. But what if that owner designates her as the future wife, in which case he would have to free her to man number two? She's been betrothed to him, hopefully consensually. But then man number three, a paramour, comes in and has sex with her. There's no discussion of consensuality, by the way, here. That's not the issue. The issue is the fact that this is a gray area. So she's not free because she hasn't been manumitted. She hasn't been married to this man, this second man. But she's not fully a slave either. She doesn't really fully belong to this guy because he's already promised to give her in marriage to him. So this is not adultery. She's not anyone's wife yet, right? It doesn't work that way. This is some other kind of situation. This is the guy who apparently is at fault in this case. How is his action evaluated, though? So first of all, they can't be put to death because they haven't committed adultery. But again, notice there's this kind of process. It says the man who had sex with her has to bring to the tent of meeting a reparation. Reparation means a payment to Yahweh. A ram as a reparation offering. Remember, a reparation offering is one of those things that you use if you have damaged someone else's stuff. Now, again, slaves are considered someone else's stuff. Now, you might expect, if this were a clear-cut case, and this guy offended damaged his property, he would have had to pay the woman's owner. But he doesn't. He has to pay God. So the question is, what wrong has he committed? Well, there's only one thing you use reparation offerings for, and that's called sacrilege, when you have violated something that is sacred. So if he makes a reparation offering, this is the reparation offering, there are three possibilities. This is the one that we have here. He has committed sacrilege against by misusing something, or in this case, someone, and he has to pay God back for it. Again, notice the owner of her is not paid back. She doesn't belong to him anymore, right? Neither is the man to whom she has been pledged. He doesn't know. He's not her husband yet, right? But nevertheless, despite the fact that you have this very kind of odd situation, something that is sacred has been wronged, and so he has to make reparation for this. He has somehow countered the moral order and must pay for it. She doesn't have to pay for it at all. She's not at fault. Only he is. So whatever we make of this, I like to think of it this way, what is it saying about holiness? Maybe holiness is not just about black and white situations. Maybe it's about gray areas. I mean, this is about as gray an area as you could get. And even the resolution is really weird. It goes against any expected outcome, right? So somehow holiness can be found in the gray areas of human life, or at least how it is to be repaired. Okay, so anyway, that's kind of odd one there. Okay, back to ordinary stuff. When you come into the land and plant a fruit tree there, you must look upon its fruit as though it were uncircumcised. Now we might chuckle at that, but remember, circumcision means it is not around the edge, right? It has nothing to do with comparison with male sexual organs. Probably what it means, and Mark, maybe you can help us out with this, is when you prune away immature fruit so that it can continue to grow. It's something like that, perhaps.
That's
Okay.
how they get bigger grapefruits.
Yeah.
Take a lot of it off.
Okay, so it's something about.
Part of them, like if they had 500 buds, they cut it down.
This is why we have a gardener in the room. He knows. Okay, so it's something about consumption of resources, right? So you plant a fruit tree so you can take its fruit, right? Before you can do that, if you treat the fruit tree as sacred, first of all, you don't eat anything from it for 3 years. On the 4th year, it may not be eaten either, because in that year you have to give all its fruit to Yahweh. Only in the 5th year, after recognizing source, thank you, source, for giving these, only then can you make use of a natural resource. So it's something about, and I'm trying to use sort of a modern term in here, but this is what it's about. There's limitations on what you can do, not just with other people, but also with the environment. That's going to be really important later on. Okay. You have a quick series of 6 don'ts. The first 2 seem to do with some kind of divination. Divination means using supernatural means to acquire knowledge of some kind. The other 2 have to do with mourning rites. So if a loved one dies, here's how not to treat yourself. This particular one, well, we'll leave it out. It's a very confusing thing. It may relate to other ancient Near Eastern rituals for communing with the dead. Not necessarily for a bad reason, but so this all has to do, in a sense, with how do we relate to those who have passed on? How do we relate to those who have passed on? You don't manipulate them as a source of specialized knowledge. Like, you don't raise grandma up from the dead to say, hey, which lottery ticket should we buy? Nor do you harm yourself. You don't harm yourself when a loved one dies. Yeah, you mourn them, but you don't harm your body, right? And you could even take that, even though these are sort of physical harms, you could think, how do people harm themselves emotionally if people die? Don't do that. Yeah.
I have something funny. And I hear that third one with your hair at the tones. Squarely into your view.
I guess that's only for men.
So can know where you're at.
Who knows? Okay. Yeah. So my point is, we could go into detail, but it sounds to me like there's a theme here, and the theme is how we relate to the dead. Obviously, we mourn the passing of loved ones, but we don't manipulate them. We don't use them in ways that are harmful to ourselves, right? Which is dishonoring their memory. Okay. Another good one, don't degrade your daughter by making a prostitute of her, otherwise the land will prostitute itself and become full of lewdness. Well, who would sell their daughter as a prostitute? It happens all the time, doesn't it? Why does it happen all that time, do you think? I mean, probably there's many reasons, but if you wanted to do studies, you got to look at the research. There's one major reason why people sell their children, especially female children, into where they traffic them. Why do they do that, do you think? Money. Because either they're totally manipulative or they can't make ends meet. Okay, so this is an interesting one. I mean, there are certainly places in the world where people do this all the time because they have no other way to eat. Okay, so this sounds very noble. Okay, so don't do that with your children, obviously. Okay, but if poverty is one of the main reasons people do this, then you will if you really want people not to do this, you also have to address the causes of it, right? Which is where we go to that last chapter, which is all about how do you create a just economy where people won't have to do this. So it's one thing to say you shouldn't do that. It's another thing to create the conditions where they don't have to do that, right? Okay, so holiness will include that. Okay. Um, keep my Sabbaths, reverence my sanctuary. I am Yahweh. Okay. What does that have to do with things? Well, that's exactly what was mentioned at the beginning. Revere your mother and your father and keep my Sabbaths. This is an inclusio. Keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. You know, you have reverence, reverence, keep, and keep. This is sort of like the end, almost the end part of it. You repeat something in a different configuration when you say we're getting near the end of the list. Okay. Don't consult ghosts or spirits. Again, this has to do with necromancy. Don't manipulate the dead. Rather show respect for the aged. Right? So they have the negative, but then you have the positive. And again, notice fear of God means taking care of the elderly, right? It's that concrete. Okay? Here's the other love command. When an alien resides with you in your land, do not mistreat such a one. Well, what does that mean? You shall treat the alien who resides with you no differently than the natives born among you. Now we know that neighbor means native, it means a citizen. An alien would be a non-citizen. You shall love the alien as yourself. The same formula as love your neighbor as yourself. So if you thought that, love my neighbor, that means love my next door neighbor and I don't have to love anyone else, think again. So in the New Testament, Jesus closes the other loopholes. You have to love your enemies too. Basically, if this is doing the same thing, there's no one can if you want to live as a holy community, there is no one who can be excluded at all. That's the core of holiness. And notice this one has, again, a rationale because you were once aliens in the land of Egypt. Don't be like the Egyptians. Don't treat others like they treated you, right? Which also is, don't take revenge type of theme there. Okay, this is the final last command. Just, be honest in economic transactions. Don't act dishonestly. Make sure your numbers are right. Don't embezzle funds because I brought you out of land of Egypt. Okay, so that is the entire list. So let's try to think big here. So 18 examples of holiness. What are some general principles we could infer from all this? What are some general, if we wanted to summarize, this is what I have my students do in class. Okay, now that you've read them all, give me a 1-paragraph summary of like the 3 main points. So what's one example?
Well, let's say, be like God.
And then the very specific dimensions of what that looks like, right? Okay. So so then the question becomes, what are the main dimensions of being holy like God? Yeah. Love, which is, it's not just that, notice it doesn't just say love everyone. Love based on self, love family, love non-family, love non-neighbor. How do we learn how to love? I mean, when we are born, we have no concept of love because we are completely self-absorbed creatures that want to survive, right? That's what infants are. But by the time we get, 1 year, 2-year old, we have the capacity to reciprocate the love, right? So how do we gain that capacity? I mean, maybe we have it sort of hardwired, we have that potential, but what is that potential? How is it activated? Practice. Hopefully we would learn it from our parents or caregivers or whoever those primary people are that enable us to survive, right? So what I find interesting about this is ultimately it says love everybody, but it's not like a utopian love everyone. It's really there's a concept here. You learn love from your family or not. You learn from your family how to love the larger community. You learn from the larger community how to love the members who are not of that community. There's a realistic process here. Yeah,
Reciprocal.
it's reciprocal.
I treat him good, and he doesn't feel like trying to burn.
And then also, as we saw here, there's also the very close attention to how we deal with conflict, right? So how we deal with conflict is one of the ways we love, right? That's one of the primary definers of it here. Okay, so that clearly is a core theme of holiness. What would be another one? Is that the only one? I mean, maybe that's the summary of it, but can we think of anything else here based on what we see here?
Not judge.
Do not judge, well, at least judge justly, right? So it's not just a private thing, it's also in public contexts, right?
Integrity.
Yeah.
Integrity was a huge one, right? Um, and why have integrity? Well, because even if no one else finds out, you're hurting yourself. People, I just finished. My son just had me watch all 5 seasons of Breaking Bad,
Yeah.
and what an amazing portrayal of how lies undoes a person, and tries to do this for his family, and then the family falls apart. It's just tragic, but it's such a brilliant psychological portrait of how the lack of integrity harms ourselves, even though we think that we're actually gaining something out of it. Yeah.
Whether we like it or not, we're all role models.
Okay. Yeah.
What are one way we live our faith life?
Right. Yeah, and so I mean, all the stuff here, and all these particular examples, it's mirroring what holiness is to other people who hopefully are then inspired by that to do likewise. Yeah, so there's all sorts of dimensions here.
Respect,
Mhm.
that's, well, revere parents, but respect for your creator.
Yeah.
Or your creation.
Right.
Your fellow creatures.
That's fear of God. Notice every time it says something specific about fear of God, it's how we treat other people. So yes, but it begins with the notion of our source, right? The respect for our source or reverence for our source is that where everything else flows from, right? Okay, so this is not just a random list, isn't it? This is a pretty sophisticated investigation of human experience, and it's suggesting that people can do this, right? It's not a utopia, but there are ways to live as a holy community. Now, onto something different. Now all the scary stuff. And again, my goal here is to understand. I'm trying to understand the underlying ideas here. Okay, so this is sandwiched between things not to do. And as I said, what's really interesting about this is almost everything has to do with sex. There's something about, necromancy, don't do that. But it also do with what we do with our bodies sexually. So the ultimate question of interpretation is, how does all that relate to that? So let's take a look at what we got here. First of all, there's a preamble to this chapter 18, the one right before the one we just looked at. It says, don't do as they do in the land of Egypt where you once lived. Don't do as they do in the land of Canaan where I'm bringing you. Don't conform to their customs. Okay, so however else we interpret that, this is, it's not some individualized notion of what we do with our bodies. It has to do with how what we do with ourselves creates a culture. It's about a culture here, really. So don't, and it's defined geographically and culturally. Don't be like the Egyptians, don't be like the Canaanites. Rather follow my decrees. Okay. Um, let's see. There's a further explanation of like a preamble to this. At the beginning and beginning of chapter 18, end of chapter 20, it has very similar and unique language. It says, "Don't defile yourselves by any of the things those people do." Defilement is the language of purity, the language of it's taking that language of ritual purity that we saw last week, which is neither good nor bad, and it's transferring it into the ethical sphere. So now this is where people use defile as a judgmental term. Don't defile yourselves. Why not? Because he says, if you do these things, the land became defiled, and I have punished the land for its wickedness. So obviously, he doesn't mean like the plants and the animals and the birds. Here, land is almost a way of talking about society. The social, the networks of people and institutions we create in order to live well. So he's envisioning that you can organize a society in a way that is self-destructive. And he says, because they defiled themselves, the land vomited out its inhabitants. That's a rather interesting expression. And that too is interesting because, the Egyptian thing, right? Where he says, let my people go and you didn't, so I'm going to throw plagues at you. That's this conventional thing of, God's going to, throw plagues at the Egyptians for Pharaoh. God's not doing anything here. So that the land itself will vomit you out. So if the land is the whole structure of human society, it's sort of envisioning that you can arrange society in a way that is self-destructive. Gosh, can we think of examples? I'm sure we could, right? Okay, so this creates terror. And I said, this is terrifying. Literally, it says, if people are doing these things, you have to deal with them because they are destroying the very foundations of your society. Okay, notice that these commandments explicitly apply to both natives and aliens resident among you. So again, it's not a religious thing. These are not religious laws. They're not they're not framed that way, I should say, right? They're not framed that because you're Israelites, you should do these things. No, this is for anyone who is living in this land. So you might say this is a negative vision of what we would call the common good, right? Which is the conditions we all need to live, right? And if you do this, they'll vomit you out. Okay, so that's the frame. Here are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 6 things that cause the land to vomit people out. Now, some of them might be obvious in our modern view, others might not be. First one is incest. So every human, yeah, go for it.
And just a question of where.
Yeah.
So are you saying that the land is symbolizing the people of the nations and society?
It seems to me in the nations, because I don't think you can punish dirt for being evil, right? I think that's what it means. Obviously, there's a metaphor going on here, but I think the idea is that societies can destroy themselves, right? I think that's what it's saying here. We can find. I mean, that's an interpretation. We can see whether that's the case. So, what are the 6 things that destroy societies? Incest, intercourse during menstruation, adultery, sacrificing your children to Moloch, male homosexual intercourse, and having sex with animals. Kind of a bizarre list, but we're going to look at each one of these. So, incest. So this is a concept that is actually universal, right? There's no human society that does not have some notion that some particular sexual pairings are not appropriate, right? Whether from out of some scientific notion of genetics or because often these couplings take place non-consensually, parents and children, abuse, things like that. But however you draw the line, I think it would be difficult to find any human society that does not have a concept of incest. Right? That there's certain things that wouldn't be done. Okay, let's see how it treats this. So, wow, it's very specific. Don't. Oh, and by the way, when it says you, it means men. So in Hebrew, unlike in English, the second person singular pronoun has gender. So there's I, the first person pronoun, doesn't have gender. I could be anyone, but the second person can be either males or females. With one exception, all the things in here are what men do, and that should actually be a clue to maybe what's at stake ultimately underneath all this. But let's take it. So no man shall approach a close female relative to have sexual intercourse. Then it gives a list. Your mother, your father's wife, your sister, your son's daughter, your daughter's daughter for whom your father's wife bore to him, father's sister, mother's sister, father's brother's wife, daughter-in-law, brother's wife, woman and her daughter, a woman's son and her daughter's son, her sister at the same time. So there's a list of people you can't marry, basically. Although it doesn't say marry, it means just have sex with. Okay, so I think most people would probably agree with most of these just off the bat. Again, may have some specifics about kinship structure here. What happens if you do? Well, there are various things. Most of them are bad. Sometimes you're put to death. Sometimes you're cut off from your people. What is interesting about this and terrifying at the same time is that anyone involved in these things must be destroyed. That means, again, our first question would be, was there abuse? Was it an assault? Was it consensual or not? Here, it doesn't matter. Anyone involved, father or the uncle rapes his daughter, the daughter has to be destroyed too. So there's something else at stake here besides consent. But that's why I say this is terrifying, because it's a rhetoric of terror. Remember that the first part of Leviticus with the tabernacle, it's a nuclear reactor. As long as you keep it clean, you're good. This is like a person with a nuclear bomb. So if a terrorist had a nuclear bomb, was flying towards the World Trade Center, what's the most peaceful thing to do? Shoot it down. Because you can't fix the World Trade Center once it's exploded, right? So this is the shift in metaphor here. You must destroy anyone who is doing these things, because otherwise the land's going to vomit everyone out, right? Everyone will be somehow affected by this. And not the way we think about things. Okay. By the way, almost all of Israel's ancestors committed incest according to these laws. Abraham, who claimed Sarah was his half sister, Jacob, who had two sisters as his wives at the same time, Jacob's son, who had sex with his father's wife, Judah, who had sex with his daughter-in-law, not unwittingly, of course, and even Moses' parents. His mother was also his aunt, according to the genealogy. And yet, with the exception of this one, none of these are condemned in the book of Genesis, are they? In fact, God goes out of his way to bless these unions, they get lots of children out of this polygamous marriage. So it's clearly you have a different school of thought than you did for whoever wrote Genesis here, or at least the person who wrote Genesis didn't think that this mattered until you have the divine presence dwelling in your midst, right? Which is the new thing here. Anyway. Next, intercourse during menstruation. Okay, I don't think that these are necessarily listed as in these are seen that people do this very often, but this should be strange to us, because last week, when it talked about ritual impurity, well, back here, this is last week. So back in the first half of Leviticus, if a woman has a flow of blood from her body, she shall be in a state of menstrual uncleanness. And if a man lies with her, if he has sex with her, he contracts her menstrual uncleanness for 7 days too. Okay, so notice that sex during menstruation is no biggie. 7 days you can't enter the tabernacle, 7 days, then you can go back. No biggie. Leviticus 18. What happens if they do this? If a man lies with a woman during a menstrual period, has intercourse with her, the two of them shall be cut off from the people. They are terrorists and must be destroyed. Again, two schools of thought in the same book, describing the exact same case and coming to totally different conclusions about it. Again, if this is a normative text for you, then you have to figure out, well, I can't just take it because it said so, because it said something else earlier on. You have to think about it. But anyway, I have no idea why this would be destructive to society. Anyway, well, the blood, we know that the blood threatens the tabernacle, but now it says it threatens the entire land. So again, remember, the first half, it was all about, what do you do if the tabernacle is defiled, which is most of the time? You just clean it. Whatever happens in the Israelite camp, defiles the tabernacle. But now the entire land of Canaan will be threatened by this. I have no idea why. Is it because maybe the tabernacle is in the middle of it now and the land is sort of like the camp and the land is sort of the equivalent of this society around there? I have no idea. But anyway, next one, adultery. Okay, don't destroy someone else's marriage. Not a bad idea. They are both killed. Again, consensual or not, they're both destroyed. Okay. But again, in this same school of thought, that case study we just looked at, if she wasn't free, they're not put to death. So even there's a counter example. There's just none here. Okay, what about Moloch? Okay, so all of these, in our way of thinking, have to do with sexual intercourse. This one seems to be the odd case out. It's about offering your child as a human sacrifice to a deity called Moloch. So either this author is sloppy and is confusing categories, or he's not confusing categories, and this might be the key to understanding the category. So let's take a look at this. A word about language. says, don't offer your offspring to Moloch. Well, what is offspring in Hebrew? Zerah. What is Zerah in Greek? It's sperm. Well, what happens in sex between man and a woman, or between a man and a sperm is displaced, right? So in the language, sperm as a procreative or a a sexual fluid is the same word as children. Is that a connection here? So maybe this is not the odd man out. Maybe this is this too has to do with sexuality indirectly because it's what you do with your offspring. Okay, so what do you do with your offspring? Don't offer any of your offspring by burning them to Moloch. Don't profane my name. What happens if you do? If anyone does it, again, it's not a religious prohibition because aliens residing in your land could do it too. Anyone who does this has to be destroyed, obviously. And if you don't destroy them, I'll fill up my can of whoop ass and start dealing with everybody here. So again, there's this emphasis on the collective damage that is done by this, not just to the person or the burnt, incinerated child, but to the whole land, the whole society. Male homosexual intercourse. I put male in there, first of all, because this is about males. There is, in fact, no prohibition anywhere in the Bible, Old or New Testament, about women having sex with one another because they're not actually having sex. Because what does sex involve in the concept of this author? It involves sperm. So if a woman and a woman have erotic contact, they are not having sex. But in the categories here, it's a totally different thing. The rabbis called it rubbing one another, but they didn't think it was sex. I mean, it's sort of like the Bill Clinton thing of, did you have sex with Monica Lewinsky? Define how you mean sex. Okay, well, this is a definition of something that's underlying all this. It's what males do with their sperm. That apparently is what can destroy society. But let's see what it says here. Okay, so you, man, shall not lie with another man as with a woman. Presumably that's a reference to sexual penetration. And if they do, they're both put to death. Okay, so that's fairly straightforward. It is not further elaborated. So this is where a lot of the, in our own culture, conflict about homosexuality comes about. People who are against it will often refer to this verse. Although when they are opposed to it, they often mean men and women, right? So they're actually invoking a different conceptual category and using it for this. But anyway, the last one, bestiality, sex with animals. Okay, there's certainly no consent going on there. This is the only one where a woman might do something. So first one, you male shall not have any sexual relations with an animal, nor shall a woman set herself in front of a understood male animal to mate with it. It's perverse. The fact that the animal must also be killed again just underscores that this is not about consent. It's not about power dynamics. It's not about violating an animal. It's about setting off a nuclear bomb that will cause the land to vomit everyone out. It does not say why these 6 things do this. But if we think about this, could there be a common, other than it has to do with what men do with their sperm, could there be a common denominator here? Something that ties these together beyond them being 6 random things. Seeds. Okay, well, let's see. So if you incinerate your seed to Moloch, then the seed no longer exists, right? These two kind of line up because if a man and his wife have sex during menstrual cycle, what will not happen? There's no the seed will not do anything, nor will it do anything here. That may be, now that would account certainly for this. It will not do anything with this. So that would actually account for about 3 of the prohibitions. Maybe that's one of the underlying logics to it. That would actually accord with ancient understandings of human generation. I don't know when, I'm not a good medical historian. I don't know when the people realized that women contribute more than a womb. But in the ancient world, including this part of the ancient world, the belief was that the sperm is the offspring. And the understanding of generation was that the woman's womb is sort of an incubator for that male person. There was no egg involved, in other words. So it's an incomplete. It's not incorrect. It's incomplete, though. And that might be why there's this obsession with women. Yeah, what else?
Okay, so if a male person comes to rape a woman,
Yes.
and if he lets him do it, she gets destroyed along with him. Is she allowed to kill him?
Oh, in self-defense, yes.
Okay.
I mean, there's nothing about people not defending themselves. Yeah. And she would only be destroyed if this was an incestuous rape or if she was married to someone else, right? Those are the only two categories. So yeah, it doesn't say anything about people not defending themselves. Yeah. But again, it doesn't really mitigate the problem, which is that everyone is destroyed, right?
Would sperm be a gift from God, would be considered holy?
Well, if the sperm is a human being, then you're killing a human being, or it's not going to become a human being, sort of thing. That may be what's at stake now. Why I say this is different from the way most religious traditions contemporarily talk about sexuality is because first of all we have a fuller understanding of anatomy and a fuller understanding of human generation. And when you get into things about homosexuality, it's actually governed much less by the Bible and much more by pagan philosophy, which we call natural law theory. So, but obviously the impetus comes from texts like this. Okay, well, anyway, so we could maybe account for at least one principle underlying this, maybe more. But in any case, again, it's a text that is designed to say you must act. If you don't act, the atomic bomb is going to blow up and the society will be gone. So again, this is my question. With none of that here, I mean, there's things you're not supposed to do here, but they almost never have to do with what you do with what mostly men do with their bodies sexually. Uh, could there be some connection, even a thematic connection, between this obsession with what happens with sperm and this call to holiness, which is about love and so forth? Any way we could connect those two things, even whether you agree with it or not, if we need to see, does it have any coherence to it? Could it be tied in, for example, to the idea of self-love? Uh, if you love yourself, you won't do things that destroy the world, in the view of this author. And obviously, people who do some of these things, there will not be people who the offspring will not come to be to love themselves and love others. Maybe there's some connection there. I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, there are people who study this, have very interesting theories, but no one's come up with a theory that actually is universally agreed upon. Mainly because it's a list. It doesn't give any explanation other than say it's bad. So I don't want to dwell on this though, because I want to get to the other good part. Okay, so for whatever reason, you have this definition of holiness and how not to be holy. And included in that, of course, which for me is the more interesting part, is that this is not just about some individual notion of perversity or uprightness, but it's about how my actions affect society. And so if we think about it that way, no matter what you think about those particular prohibitions, we can think there are certain things we can do that could destroy society or that could contribute to the destruction of human well-being. That seems to me the ultimate underlying idea. But what about this? Okay, so the land. What we just read about, the rhetoric was all about the land. Don't defile the land because it'll vomit you out. Then it talked about be holy like me. And many of the commandments here had to do with the land. Leave the gleanings of your harvest for the poor and the alien. Dedicate your fruits first to God before eating them. Don't make your daughter a prostitute so the land is defiled. Don't mistreat the alien who resides in your land. You see the land theme here. The land is society. The land is community. So here it's don't defile it. Here's how you should act within it. But this is still on an individual basis. There's a new idiom that comes out at the conclusion of this. And that is when God says, the land is mine, and you, Israel, are but resident aliens under my authority. Okay, that should be a kind of a striking statement, because up until now, there's the Israelites and there's the resident aliens. They can live together, but they're different, right? Here it says, no, you're all resident aliens as far as I'm concerned. This is a different image. This is the image of God as landlord. Not just that I'm your roommate in the tabernacle, I'm the landlord. And so it's my land, it's my rules, so you cannot abuse the land, you cannot abuse people, you cannot institute laws that are abusive to other people in the land or to the land itself. So he's into ecology too here. So we will see there are two sets of commandments. One is they revolve around time. And they both revolve around that idea of the Sabbath, right? Remember, the Sabbath in this strand of thinking was when God contemplates the goodness of what exists, of creation, right? He contemplates the goodness of the ecosystem he created, including us humans. The sabbatical, the seventh day, is when you pause from your activity and you reflect on how you contribute to that goodness or not. There's what's called the sabbatical year now. Every seventh year, something happens. And then there's what's called the Jubilee year. We probably all had a British monarch in a lifetime who's had their Jubilee celebration, right? What does Jubilee mean? What year is that?
Well, it's where you're free.
Yeah, that's the content here, but the term, but we use the term Jubilee for every 50. It's your 50th anniversary, right? Which is 7 times 7 years plus 1. So as we'll see again, everyone loves the story. Oh, the God rested on the seventh day. This is actually becomes the principle, the temporal, the time principle for the concept of justice within the world, as we'll see. Okay, let's examine this. Okay, so here is the sequence. You have sabbatical years every seventh year, and then you have the in-between year, the Jubilee year. What happens at this time? Okay, when he says, keep my Sabbaths in the call to holiness, he doesn't just mean this one, he means these ones as well. Okay, so how is time structured? This is the sabbatical year. It's one of these, mirrored things. So let's look at the outside. When you enter the land I'm giving you, because I'm the landlord, let the land keep a Sabbath for me. Notice the land can keep a Sabbath now, not just people. While the land has its Sabbath, all its produce will be food for you to eat for yourself and your dependents, your laborers, your tenants who live with you, likewise for your livestock. You can use the produce of the land, but you cannot farm the land every seventh year. Now, this is actually just good agronomy, right? Farmers know this. If you keep using the same land every year, what will happen? It will run out of nutrients and therefore will be incapable of sustaining crops and therefore incapable of feeding you and the poor and the alien, right? Okay, so here it specifies that for 6 years, you can use the land, you can use your resources, but in the seventh year, you cannot use the land. You have to allow it to have that rest for me. Yeah, so we could say, oh, this is all just about good, sustainability, but there's a theological reason for it ultimately because source says it's mine, not yours. Now, what happens if you don't? Well, I will scatter you among the nations at the point of my drawn sword, leaving your countryside desolate and your cities deserted. Then shall the land during the time it lies waste make up its lost Sabbaths while you were in the land of your enemies. Then shall the land have rest and make up for its Sabbaths during all the time that it lies desolate, enjoying the rest that you would not let it have. As before, God is perfectly willing to destroy people in order to save the ecosystem. Think of the flood, right? Now he says, I'm not going to do that on a global basis again. You guys might do it on your own, but I'm not going to do it to you. But he says, if I'm the landlord, if you mess with the ecosystem, you're out. I save the ecosystem instead of you, right? So this is consistent with and it's not that God loves the environment but hates humans, but humans are part of a larger ecosystem. That's why it's very, very good according to Genesis 1, right? So the first principle is ecological sustainability and ecological reverence for its source. Okay, the Jubilee year, every 50th year, every 7 times 7 years, notice when it starts. It starts on the 10th day of the 7th month, the Day of Atonement. What happened on the Day of Atonement? We learned about this last week. What happens on the Day of Atonement? This is the quiz, right? What happens on the Day of Atonement? Yeah.
When we send out the scapegoats,
When God forgives everyone's sins. So when God forgives all of the deliberate wrongs that people have done, if they're repentant, every day or every year, that day, everything is forgiven. Now there's a different dimension to that. What else happens on the Day of Atonement? On the 50th year, you blow a horn. And that horn means the whole year is sacred. What does that mean? It means you have to proclaim liberty to the land for all its inhabitants. What is liberty? Freedom, like the Statue of Liberty, right? Freedom from what? In this case, freedom from debt. Freedom from debt, slavery, right? So every 50th year, all debts must be forgiven. So notice, God forgives them, and they have to forgive one another, their debts. Yeah.
Well, don't you get your land back then, also?
Yes. Yes, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But again, for people who've grown up within sort of a Christian context, you've probably heard of the Lord's Prayer. That's Jesus, where he teaches people how to pray. He says, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Guess where he got that from? John. He didn't make it up. Now, obviously, it can include more than just debts, but it includes debts, right? Okay, so on this Jubilee, each of you shall return to your own property which you have lost through debt foreclosure, and each of you will return to your own family after being a debt slave. So let's see how this works out. Okay, the Jubilee is also happens to be a sabbatical year, so you can't use the land that year. Okay, because you have to forgive everyone's debts on every 50th year. By the way, there's another version of this law in Book of Deuteronomy that says every 7th year you have to do this. That'd be a very different economy if everyone forgave everyone's debts every 7 year. But in any case, the principle is the same. Therefore, how do you treat one another in the meantime? When you sell any land to your neighbor or buy any land from your neighbor, do not deal unfairly with one another. Well, of course, you shouldn't be unfair. But who gets to choose what a fair price would be? Well, you would think, but here it says, actually, no, I'm the landlord. I get to decide what fairness looks like. And here's how he decides it. You can sell your land on the basis of the number of years since the last Jubilee, because it's really the number of harvests that the person sells you or you are buying, because the land is mine, not yours. So even if you can buy and sell land, and land is just sort of the metaphor for anything. But remember, land in an agricultural society is your source of livelihood. You cannot go to Giant Eagle, right? So if you don't have land, you are a landless laborer. You're in the town square looking for labor, and maybe you'll get work, and maybe you'll be fed. So land is a big deal. And this is all like on terraced farming on hillsides. So every family, every social unit has land to sustain them. So if you lose that land, you're really in trouble. And notice it says so why would anyone sell it? Well, you sell it because you're starving. You need to buy food, right? So again, it's not a utopia. It doesn't say when you come to this land, nothing bad will ever happen. There'll be crop failure, there'll be drought, anything might happen. But for whatever reason, you have the right to sell or buy land, provided you return it every 50 years. So how would that determine how much you can sell it for? Well, here we have it, calculation of land price. So if Mark, if you go into debt and you need to sell me your land, and this is the first year of the Jubilee cycle, you can earn a lot of money off it, because if you sell it to me, that's 50 years I get potentially to use it. But if you go into debt in year 36, you can't sell it for as much, nor can I demand as much for it, because I'm only going to have it for a short amount of time. So there's actually an objective calculation of how much you can buy and sell for. It's not your choice. It's not the seller's choice. It's God's choice, because it's his land. Yeah.
When, just like with today, like people could die
Yep.
when they're younger. So does it go to the oldest son then?
Good question. It says every 50 years it reverts to whichever family originally had the land, right? The notion is that God is going to allot the land to each family. So each family sort of has an ancestral heritage, which they can lose through debt, but they gain it back at this time. So again, this is not a capitalist system. There's no marketplace here. It's just, these are the rules for it. And again, he says, you can't sell it irrevocably because it's mine, not yours. Because it's mine and not yours, you must allow the land to be redeemed. So even if it's not the next Jubilee, if Maddie, lost your land, and I still have a right to use it, but then you get enough money to buy it back from me before the Jubilee, I have to sell it back to you. It's not my choice. So there's this emphasis on the common good means every family has what it needs to support itself. And even when they lose that, they must get it back, right? But there are three ways of doing this. Actually, I think I skipped a part here. Oh, actually, no. Okay, so there are three different things that could happen that are bad. If I go into debt, let's say I have to pay it off by selling part of my property. What if it gets so bad that I have to sell all my property and become a tenant farmer? And what happens if I can't even pay that off and I would become a debt slave? There are three stages of destitution. There's a different solution for each one. So let's see, in stage one, if I just have to sell part of my property off, what are the rules? The first solution to this is my closest relative who has the duty to redeem my land, he shall come and redeem it. So if I lose my land and you happen to be my cousin and you have the money, you have to use that money to buy my land back from me. That's what family does for one another, right? It's not optional. But notice here too, this is what I like to say, is that this way of understanding property and land. It's both radical and conservative at the same time. It's radical because at the end of the day, it goes back to you, right? Even if you're dead and your family and your descendants inherit it. But it's also conservative. The first solution is not to forgive debt. The first solution is to pay it back. And if you can't do it, then a family member has to help you, right? Now, why do you think that would be? I mean, if he says, my land is my rules, why do you say you have to forgive debts all the time? What would that do? You have to forgive, let's say he said every 3 months you have to forgive everyone's debt. What would that do? You wouldn't have you couldn't have a very stable economy for one thing, but more importantly, there would be no trust in society, right? So something about buying and selling or transactions, it's an expression of trust and integrity, right? I promise I'll pay you back. That was one of the things of holiness, to have integrity, right? So notice this system, it doesn't undermine that, but it says there are various remedies for when it doesn't work. So if I don't have a relative to redeem it, but I later earn enough money to get it back, and I say, I'm going to pay you back for it, then you have to pay it back. You have to give the land back to me. But if not, the Jubilee comes and you give it back to me, right? If I'm still alive. Again, this is the life expectancy, 30 years. So maybe this is not that radical. The 7-year one, a little more radical. Okay, stage two. When one of your kindred is reduced to poverty and becomes indebted to you, what do? You shall support that person like a resident alien. Let your kindred live with you. Do not exact interest in advance or accrued interests, but out of fear of God, let your kindred live. So here, fear of God means not extorting people with exorbitant loans. Don't give your money at interest or your food at profit. So notice the first thing you have to do is you have to provide a roof over their heads if they go into debt. If they become landless, you have to give them a roof and you cannot exploit them. Why? Because I brought you out of the land of Egypt, so you have to be nice to people. Finally, what happens if they are so destitute they have to sell themselves? Now, we might say, okay, well, we know that they can be held for slaves for 6 years according to that law way back in Exodus. But here, this is even more radical. It says you cannot enslave a fellow community member. Instead, you have to treat them like laborers and tenants working with you until the Jubilee year. In other words, the solution to poverty is put people to work, give them jobs, which is actually a pretty good idea because if you constantly are just bailing them out, they lose agency, right? They lose the capacity to stand up on their own two legs. The goal is always to remedy the situation so that people can take care of themselves, right? So this actually bids what Exodus permits. You cannot enslave fellow Israelites here. Okay, what about non-Israelites? Can you enslave them? Well, yes, actually, apparently. You can't make your own kindred work as slaves, but you can take slaves as non-Israelites and you can bequeath them to your children. So this is not entirely equal. But let's say that there's a third example here. What happens if your kindred, having so reduced to poverty, sells themselves to a resident alien who has become wealthy? Well, according to that, the resident alien has to redeem them, has to give has to buy them. You have to buy them back from that resident alien, and the resident alien must sell them back. They cannot hold on to them. But notice that the resident alien gets compensated for this. So even though there is sort of unequal treatment of rights as with the non-community members, they still have the right to compensation. So this whole thing has an interesting idea of justice and of economic matters, that these are indeed, as we know in our society, they are often very vital to maintaining our well-being. So holiness involves that too. It's not just about religion, it's not just about individual morality, it's about how we structure the laws of society. So that is the holiness laws, at least the core elements of them. And this is what God gives to Israel at Mount Sinai, and they're about to march off on their journey now and get into more misadventures as they go. But hopefully, a couple of things that I like to bring out of this is that, again, inspiring and terrifying at the same time. The same texts that say destroy everyone involved in these practice X, Y, or Z practices, it also says love your neighbor as yourself. And it also has these core, values that we've seen are quite inspiring too, and quite necessary for human well-being. And it's all couched as be like me, right? So this is how holiness is defined. It's nothing abstract. It's nothing ethereal. It is grounded in our interpersonal nature as people. Yeah.
So where does this leave the state of Israel, who is trying to kill off every one of the aliens they live with in their community?
Yes. So we'll get to that narrative when we get to the genocide stuff in the book of Joshua. But yeah, basically, it's when people don't do what they're supposed to, right? This is what you have with Netanyahu. I mean, most Israelis hate what he does, and unfortunately, you have a lot of extremists in Israel. Also, if you put people in a settler situation, like many of them do, you put them in a situation like that, they'll start behaving like animals. They'll start behaving this way. This is in any situation where you have an occupying power. Um, I mean, I don't want to get into all the details because that's a complicated situation. But yeah, it's not observing any of these things.
Well, there's the fact of our phone line just fell. It won't come back. I'll raise my hand.
Yeah, so it's the same thing of asking, why does America not always do what it's supposed to? Or why does any country not do what it's supposed to? We call that human nature. They're pesky humans, right? As I always like to say, the grass is never greener on the other side. In every tradition, in every culture, there are ideals and violations of those ideals. And what we've shown you here are the ideals, right? And so that's part of the goal of this kind of series is we're educating people to say, here's what the tradition actually says, right? Yeah, there are complications as we get into the later books, and the only real solution to it is the fact that, as we see, there are many schools of thought, and that the function of a canon of sacred texts is you have all these voices in conversation with one another, or at least provoking the reader to question, well, out of these many things that are said, which are the ones that are normative for me? What do I follow? How do I understand the core message? And again, same thing in any culture, you'll have people who take very unbalanced interpretations of things. But that's the one benefit of having texts is that you can't say that they don't say these things, right? You can't say that's just making it up. No, this is very clear. It's at the very center of the whole thing. It's not peripheral.
Israel made a really stupid commitment when Christ was crucified. Through that process, you study the New Testament, you know that. I know you know. Let that be first be on us and our children's children.
According to the Christian tradition, there is no such thing as an intergenerational curse, though, so it's an ineffectual one. But different story. We will get to it at some point.
So could you believe that? Make that your life philosophy?
Well, I don't think anyone would make that their life philosophy. That's what which version do we believe? There's 4 of them. It only says that in one of them. Sorry. So yeah, there's all sorts of things that we can talk about, and I'm happy to talk about all of them. But again, my goal is that we establish what does the text say first of all, and eventually we'll get to what other texts say as well, and we can see how they interact with one another. But yeah, yeah, there's always the violations of the ideal, and as we saw, even in these laws about how to live together, it presumes that people are going to violate them, and so it shows remedies for what to do when people violate them. In all of these cases, so in that sense, it's very realistic. So, okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've got a couple more weeks to go here. So.